to the In Conversation series to inspire next-gen leaders by bringing to you insightful conversations with top leaders from around the world. I'm Anvitha Vijay, a Forbes 30 under 30 and the founder of Buds Leaders, to empower young people to be bold, impactful leaders contributing to our community. Today, we are lucky to have with us Simone Clarke, CEO of United Nations Women Australia. Driving impact has been a big part of her career, and she's held numerous top leadership and executive roles across the not-for-profit and consumer sector. And prior to UN Women, Simone was an executive director for World Animal Protection, global emergency director for Save the Children, and deputy chief at UNICEF headquarters. So thank you so much for your time, Simone. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your leadership journey and advice for young aspiring leaders like myself wanting to contribute to our community.
Thanks so much, Anvitha. Lovely to be here and lovely to have a conversation with you, and certainly share some knowledge perhaps of my journey, but also talk about your journey and the journey ahead for young leaders like you. And as you mentioned, next gen leaders is something I'm absolutely passionate about and committed to. So I'm delighted that we could have this conversation today.
Same here. So I think it'll be great to start with what drives you to create community impact, and what are some of the key initiatives and impact that you have driven across UN Women, World Animal Protection, UNICEF, and throughout your career?
So I think from a career perspective, when you look at my CV, I've had a somewhat unorthodox career in terms of the roles that I've held, everything from working with the United Nations through to working with the Australian Football League and also Save the Children and other NGOs, but also working with Telstra in terms of the tech for good sector. So having had that experience, I think one of the things that's most interesting to me is the fact that certainly in terms of my career, for me, purpose has always been core. So people talk about impact and purpose, but I think for me, it comes down to just a really fundamental sense of fairness. So if I see inequity or if I see unfairness, or if I think, well, why are women penalised in the workplace, for example, by getting paid less money? Why are animals not farmed well? Why are they not looked after? Why do they not lead a decent life? Right back to when I sort of started out in media and PR, which was really looking at in the architecture space, how we create safe spaces and nice spaces for all occupants of the planet. So for me, it's really about purpose and then by extension, what impact do you want to have? So I think probably about 10 years or so ago, I went through a leadership course when I was at Telstra, and I was really struck by something that was said to me then. And it was all about what type of leader do you want to be? And the person who was leading the session talked about, instead of having a to-do list, why don't you have a to-be list? So in other words, what do I want to be? Or, what impact do I want to have? And for me, after I came out of those 3 days of intense introspection, looking at myself as a leader, the thing that I really emerged with was the fact that I wanted to have a positive impact wherever I was. And that goes to my family, my friendships, my career, but just so that, you can leave a positive mark on whatever you're doing. And that can be everything from serving coffee in a cafe to homeless services, in the city, Sydney. So for me, it's really about purpose, and that's what's really driven me my whole career.
I think that's really cool, especially your example about creating a to-be list instead of a to-do list. I think as young people, we're so familiar with the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think there are a lot of set answers that we're expected to give. But it really is about, what do we feel good about doing, and, what is the sort of impact that we want to leave on the world, Yeah. So I really like that example.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah, I like that. It really struck me, and that was some 10 years ago, and it's really stuck with me that whole time. So yeah, I think it was a really insightful, probably one of the, the most, in terms of training, I think that was one of the most interesting sessions I've had in terms of leadership development. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that we should all keep in mind. The other question I had was around, the 2021 Global Gender Gap Report by the World Economic Forum revealed it'll take 135 years to reach gender equality. That's too long. And it shouldn't take us over a century for us to have, the equal rights and equal opportunities. So we must accelerate this, right? And so women make up over 50% of our workforce, but they only make up less than 20% of CEOs. And majority of boards are male dominated, and women are paid over 20% less than men. And a recent McKinsey case study showed that in every step of the corporate ladder, from entry level to C-suite, women lose ground to men, with female representation starting at about 50%, but it drops to just 24% at the C-suite level. So I'd love to hear from you. Why is it important we have to push for diversity, equality, and inclusion?
Well, why is it important? Look, I think fundamentally, even if there are a lot of people that might look at it and say, well, it's not just about women, it's about all of us, and I certainly agree with that. But I think it is important because in addition to the studies and the stats that you mentioned, there's also a whole lot of work being done around the productivity, the efficiency with women at the helm. In other words, women in leadership roles, running businesses, in executive roles are actually very efficient. They have a different style of leadership than men do. And we know from experience that where we have had female CEOs and female executive leaders, those businesses have prospered, and so have the communities where they work. So I think even if you don't think it should happen for women, just for women's, it's not an end in itself. Just having the gender equality is not just about the end game. It's really about ensuring that the value that women contribute, whether it's in the workforce, whether it's at home, whether it's with their families, that is recognised. And the value, and I don't necessarily just mean the dollar value, but the value that women bring to every scenario, every situation is different but complementary to that which men bring. So when you have those two powerful forces coming together and working together, the outcomes for all of us are just better. So I agree with you. When I see numbers like 135 years or so, I think there's another WEF report that I think has just literally come out in the last week, and I think we've clawed back 4 years. So way to go. But I think we're still at 132 years. So we're still a long, long way away. Yeah. But I think that also factors into, if we factor in the current indicators as they stand globally, and then also the rate of change that we've seen historically. So if you look back to the 60s, there were not as many women in the workforce then as there are now. So things are changing. And with more women in the workforce, employers have to be more adaptable to the needs of women. And so that's a good thing. I think there's a lot of conversations at the moment around the fact that invariably women take career breaks, whether it's to have a family, whether it's to study, but predominantly it's about taking time out to have a family. And in doing so, they put pause on their career. And by that, I mean for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, depending how long that career break is, women are literally out of the workforce. And the challenge is that when they go back into the workforce 5 years later, there's not a lot of roles that are part-time that are at management level. So, for example, if you've studied and you've got to say 30 years old and you're doing really well in your career, but you want to step out and have a family, by all means we can do that, and there's means and mechanisms in place for that. But when you enter back into the workforce, you almost enter back in where you left off, and the opportunities, particularly around part-time middle management and management roles, are a lot less. Yeah. And we also know from history that career progression is based on moving up the ladder, if you like, moving up within any business, within any corporate. And so if you want to do that, you need to get into management role. But if women are excluded from that because they can only work part-time, for example, after having a family, then that impacts their ability to be able to progress in their career. So there's lots of different things that impact on women's career progression, full stop. But I don't think they are insurmountable, and there are certainly things that more and more business owners, more corporations are looking at to say, if we want to retain these people and if we want them to come back to us because they are solid, great employees, then we need to make sure that we look after them and that we offer part-time and flexible roles. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's that we can work from anywhere in most cases. And the nature of work and the future of work, instead of this sort of 9-to-5 office scenario, has certainly changed a whole lot in the last 3 years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, your first point about the value that women can bring, it's a unique value, but it's also complementary to the value that everyone else brings to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And as you're saying, that the stuff like the maternity leave and things like that, those are things that I think it's reasonable for employers to start giving. And it's also creating a better work environment for everyone, I would say, not just women. And so, yeah, I completely agree. And I definitely think that the value that women can bring is so important. And it's really, it's clearly important that we, close that gap of 135 years and push for diversity, equality, and inclusion.
Absolutely.
So that's a nice segue into the next question, which is, recently there have actually been some wins for women. So, for example, last year's Tokyo Olympics was called the first gender balanced Olympic Games. And Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics took that even further. And in Australia this year, we had a record number of women elected into parliament. So in our federal election, which is really great, but it is still only 30%. So we still need to, make sure we push that even further. And in 2021, 26% of all CEOs and managing directors were women. It's, again, not enough, but it is an improvement from 2019, where only 15% were women. And 2021, we also had a record number of female CEOs of Fortune Global 500 companies. So there were 23 women, including 6 women of color. And as I said, it's not enough, but it is better than the 14 from 2020. So what are the top 3 things that we can do to accelerate more wins like this and, get to 50% of women in government, in boards, and in CEO and executive level roles, and reach that gender equality much faster than the predicted 135 years?
Wow, that's a big question. But I think you make some really, really valid points about, there are gains. And very often I have to check myself, because it's very easy to look at what's not happening as opposed to what is happening. There have been some gains. I mean, COVID eroded quite a lot of the gains. We went back a decade in terms of the gender gap just in 2 or 3 years in terms of the impact of COVID on women and women's participation. But I think there's a few things. One is actually access to those opportunities. So ensuring that in the workplace, as I mentioned before, women have access to the roles, they have access to career progression, but also access to part-time roles in a more senior management level. But it's not just about what can be offered to women, it's also about how we look to engage in the workforce and how we look at our own futures. So what can we do to actually empower ourselves? And things like political leadership is a really tough one, because we know women are underrepresented in government. As you mentioned, the most recent federal election was certainly a win for gender balance, and certainly the numbers are a lot better than they have been in the past. And it'll be really interesting to see how that then manifests itself in shifts in policy and legislation and things that come through government. So I think that's really interesting. But also, when you look at things like, going into politics, it's an incredibly demanding job. It means time away from family. So I think, the other thing, all of these things are interrelated. So there are so many dimensions that impact on a woman's desire, if you like, even to go into politics, because, not a lot of women want to be away from their families. And so that's a huge sacrifice. So I look to women in politics and say, well done you, because you are making significant sacrifices, both personally and professionally, to go into public office. And then also we need to ensure that there are things like childcare and other things around and supportive of those independents and female ministers, so that they can continue to, look after their families, but also play a vital role in leadership. So I think that's really important, and we need more women to step up and step into leadership roles, particularly in government. We're seeing more of it. And there's also organisations around that are actually now helping women train for political, and public life, which I think is fabulous. So more opportunities, more training, more women facing into some of those tougher career challenges. But also you might hear about what's called the burden of care. And particularly in family situations, the burden of care or family care invariably falls to women. So, you also talked about maternity and paternity leave. That, they are available in Australia, and they, with obviously different conditions depending on who you work for, et cetera, et cetera. But, we need more men to also take up paternity leave so that their wives can continue to work if they choose to. And this is the other thing is, returning to work or determining who is the caregiver in any family situation is a very personal decision. So I'm not saying every man should stay at home. I'm not saying every woman should go to work. But I think if we ensure that there are the support networks and the structures around men and women to make a decision and to have a choice about who takes up that care, who goes back to work, etc., that just makes it a more even playing field for men and women. And, there's a lot of men that actually want to stay home with their kids. And actually, I know that my husband was, when we were married and we had a young family, he is in the film industry, but he had a very sort of flexible, he'd go away for, to do shoots and then come home. But when he came home, he actually, looked after the kids. And I think he's a far better caregiver than I ever was when my children were young. So, I think we naturally assume that women should be the caregivers, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think we should share the load, but also it's a personal choice. And just to have those choices is really important, because then it gives you, whether you're male or female, it gives you an opportunity, or, in terms of whichever type of parenting role you play, it just gives you an opportunity to make those choices. So it's really important to have that opportunity and choice, I think, more than anything.
I think choice is such an important, relevant point as well, with all the stuff that's happening around the world. And I think that, bring back to our previous question about women, you're talking about women in public and policy making, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for women to create innovation and put forward things that haven't really been thought about before, because it's coming from a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I love your story about your husband. That was really cute.
He's a much better parent than I am, I have to say, and a better caregiver. He was way more patient and wonderful, and probably still is with the kids. But mine, they're all grown up now, so they're on their own in terms of parenting. But I think you called out something around having that choice and having that opportunity to be able to make those choices, and I think that's what's really important for any caregiver, and that they feel supported in those decisions and choices, because again, it goes to that assumption that one person will assume the care, or one person will take a career break, or when COVID happened, the assumption was that women would either go part-time or they would take the burden of care around homeschooling.
Yeah.
What is that assumption based on? So I think you talked about what else we could do. I think sometimes we need to challenge those assumptions and question, well, does it make more sense for me to homeschool, or does it make more sense for my partner to homeschool, or what does that actually look like? So I think, a really big thing about gender equality and women feeling more empowered is questioning those assumptions and the sort of status quo, because just because it's been like that for 50 or 100 years doesn't mean that's what it has to look like for the next 10 years. Yeah. So I think if we continue to question it and ask why, I always ask, why do women get paid less than men? I just don't get it. There's no logical reason I can point to, but there it is. And do we accept it? So when Anvitha, when you went to the workforce full time, you will be having conversations about your salary and your remuneration. And I think it's really important that not to ask, am I getting paid the same as a man, but to ask around the parity between, roles. Are people doing the same role, getting the same income? And I think as women get more comfortable asking those questions, then things will also change as well, because sometimes people just accept that that's the way things are. And I think particularly with gender equality, the way things are do need to change. And so we need to continue to question that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really useful tool to question that is through media as well, because I feel like a lot of the stereotypes that are about women and other genders is coming through from media, right? That women are especially through literature and stuff from a long time ago, the roles that women are more sensitive and emotional, which is, in some sense, it could be nice qualities, but in other senses it's also portraying women as weak, which is really not. So I think, absolutely, we have to question the stuff that's being said around us, and really challenge that. So and talking about challenges, it'll be really helpful to hear about some challenges that you have faced in your journey, and how you overcame them to become the leader that you are today.
I have had the incredible good fortune of working with some amazing women who were real trailblazers when I was younger. And so they gave me opportunity to work really hard. They gave me opportunities to with flexibility. I remember when I had my second child, I had the first child, and I was working part-time then for UNICEF. And at that stage, to be able to be a part-time media manager at my age, at 30, and it's not because I was young to do that, there just weren't the part-time roles around. So I've actually been incredibly lucky, because without that flexibility, I would have had to make much tougher decisions about my career and my family and what I did or didn't do. So I think it's I take that role of mentoring really seriously for young women that I work with as well, that we ensure that we ensure flexibility. But again, I think it's, we were talking about challenging assumptions. I remember when I was studying at university and I was working part-time in communications, and my then boss asked me to go and pick up his dry cleaning. And I looked at him and I went, oh, okay, that's interesting. And I thought to myself, is that really in my job description? But I didn't say anything. Anyway, I just sort of sat down. I went, I don't think I should be picking up his dry cleaning. Anyway, his executive assistant, I asked her and I said, should I be picking up his dry cleaning? She said, oh, no, that's okay. That's something I normally do. You don't need to worry about it. But for me, it continues to come back to me, and I was probably 23 at the time, because I should have questioned that in that moment and said, but, should I be picking up your dry cleaning? Is that part of my role here in the business? And I think that's another lesson, that you can question things in a very respectful way. But I think just in questioning some of those assumptions we talked about, it means people will stop and think about that. Because I'm sure if I said that, he was a lovely man, and I'm sure if I said that to him, he would have been horrified to think that he was being sexist or demeaning to me by asking me to pick up his dry cleaning. It's almost just that's who he was, because that's what he'd grown up with. So I think, people often say, the behaviour you let go is the behaviour that you accept. So again, I think we can be respectful, but still call out when we see things that aren't right, or misogynistic behaviour, or women being treated differently in the workplace, or not being able to speak in office situations, or not being able to share, their thinking on certain things. So it really is all our responsibility, I think, to call that out and to question that. Again, it can be done respectfully. You don't have to be adversarial about it. But I think we all need to question what are those assumptions that are being made, and why aren't women either being given equal voice, equal pay, or just not equal opportunity? So I think that's really important. And I think you talked about added things around the diversity piece and inclusion, and whether you look at LGBTQI people in the workforce, and they actually have a very different set of challenges. Being respectful of that, and also being open to the fact that everyone will bring a different self to work. So how do we be more inclusive just generally as human beings? I think whether it's at work, at home, anywhere, is really important.
Absolutely. And I think you, at the start of your answer, you're talking about like mentors and support networks that you had. So that's actually part of my next question. So how did any mentors and support networks you have help you on your journey? And, why is it important for us, like young girls and people, to have those mentors and support networks?
I think it's important for everyone to have mentors and support networks, whether it's, when you're starting out in your career, when you start out after university, or even your first job, you've got no idea what you're doing. You've got some knowledge in your mind, you've got a little bit of experience, hopefully, but you learn on the job. And I really feel for people entering the workforce through COVID. A lot of my daughter's friends were at that age where they'd finished studying and they were entering roles. And one young friend started a grad program with a really big company, really impressive company. And she had never stepped foot inside the office. She was working from home. She had only met her colleagues virtually. And she was reflecting. She said, I don't know if this is the right decision. I said, I think you need to just give it a bit more time, because what you don't understand is you are getting a very thin slice of what your work life actually looks like. You're getting no mentoring. I mean, besides virtual, of course. And there's a lot of people starting out in their careers who aren't getting that organic learning and that organic mentoring, and just being in an office and having someone more senior go, no, that's okay, we can do it that way. Or what about if we do it this way? So I think there's been a real gap recently around that mentoring, that face-to-face mentoring. But I think also there's a lot of people, including myself, that are, I think, really trying to make an effort that wherever possible we can talk to younger people, younger women, and offer them opportunities, a chance to have a conversation, if nothing else, because it is really, really important. And I really worry. I've had fabulous mentors. I've worked in great environments. I've learned a lot what to do. I've learned a lot what not to do. You learn by experience. You learn by doing. And so you can have all the mentors in the world as well, but I think you also need that on the job, literally in the role, you need some support as well. So it's really important. I think there's a lot of women my age who recognize that and are really trying to make an effort around mentoring. And I think there's lots of great programs that are emerging now for young leaders, including, we offer things like, scholarships for MBAs, some other sort of we're looking actually at the moment at a development program for women, young women, and exactly as you mentioned, next gen leaders. But I think women like you are already leading, so you're just leading in a different way, in a different sense. So leadership is many things, and it doesn't always mean that you have to be paid the most or to be the boss or whatever that looks like. Leadership comes, I think you're demonstrating leadership right now in terms of what you do and how you carry yourself, and the conversations that we've had. So I think there's leaders and there's mentors everywhere. So surround yourself with people that help you grow.
Thank you. And yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important for us to, be able to talk to other people that are more senior to us and, understand their learnings and experiences so that we can also grow and they can also grow in the best way. And so my last and favorite question is, what is your number one advice for girls and young people wanting to be impactful leaders and contributing to our community?
Oh, there's so much advice to give. No, not really. I think personally for me, it's a conversation around courage. People talk about confidence, and I've read lots of articles about leadership and a whole lot of other things, but have the courage to challenge yourself. Have the courage to take chances on different roles. Have the courage to question people's perception of what your career path should be. Because, I know when I was younger, my father was like, I said, oh, I want to do this. And he said, well, that's good, darling, but I hope it pays well because, I don't think you're going to make any money out of it. And yeah, he was incredibly supportive, as was my mother, of any of my choices that I've made. But, I think the biggest thing is be courageous and don't be afraid to fail. Like, we all fail. I think, sometimes you can be so paralyzed by the fear of, but what if I don't do it right? People don't do it right every day, but the earth doesn't stop turning. Yeah. So you just be the best that you can be, challenge yourself and find the courage to do new things, because it's only by pushing a challenge in yourself that you do grow, I believe. So you can stay doing the same job for the rest of your life and you'll grow in different ways, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, having the courage and self-belief that I often say to my daughters, you've got this, you're so sorted. You will just have no problem at all doing this. Sometimes you just need reassurance. But I think it fundamentally comes down to that self-belief and courage. So if there's one thing, take away, believe in yourself and you can do just about anything. And I think, Anvitha, you're a living demonstration of that. So more power to you, I say.
Thank you. And I think that's very well said. I think we have to have the courage in ourselves and, dare to dream big and pursue what we believe in. And I think that's a lovely note to end it. So thank you so much for your time, Simone. And it's always great speaking with you. And I'm sure that the young people, girls, and everyone watching this found it really inspiring to hear from you. I certainly did.
Okay.
And to the viewers, I hope you enjoyed tuning in, and see you next time.